So I'm going to be introducing 4 students who are in the education department. And within the education department, we have 3 sort of primary emphases, one on social context and social foundations of education, including community orientation, one on language and literacy kind of focus, and another on mathematics and science education, STEM education focus. And you'll see that the speakers, the 4 speakers are from these areas, represent each of these areas. So our first speaker is Andrea Vazquez, and she is a doctoral candidate in education studying race, geography, Black diasporas, and schooling.
My project starts from the notion that taking claim to space is a process of self-assertion. I work with a community whose sense of self is entangled to their town, and where an identity as Mexican field worker is an act of resistance to white hegemony. But what happens when this resistance practice can portray some histories as directly opposed to the town's identity? My ethnography explores how Black diasporic youth make sense of their Blackness in a high school that serves primarily Latinx families, and where Black histories slip away through a narrative that there are no Black people in the school. The mural at the top of this slide is in the high school's cafeteria, and it was painted in 1993 and shows Black students graduating from the high school. At the bottom of the slide is a picture of Kawasa, a young rapper and alumni of the school, whose first album is titled after the town. In my work, I argue that these images are visual representations of how Black youth take claim to space by creating expressive acts that let them define their Blackness through their own narratives, and thus rupture the knowability of their surroundings to reinsert Black diasporas in the primarily Mexican town.
Thanks, Cynthia. Classes for recent immigrant students who are new to English tend to focus on practicing individual words and grammatical structures. But when students communicate their ideas with very little language in common, they bring a resourcefulness that could be leveraged for language learning. I want to show you an example of what language learning can look like when students use their own communicative resources and the classroom provides multiple avenues for understanding. So in this picture, you see 2 students and the hand of a third in a high school biology class for recent immigrant students. Samira, who has the strongest English, speaks Tigrinya, an East African language. Feliciano and Paulina are both Spanish speakers, and Feliciano also speaks Mam, which is an indigenous language from Guatemala. Here, Feliciano had asked Samira for help making sense of a video that described in English how carbon dioxide gets trapped in the atmosphere. Samira used English and gestures to explain that process to him. And Feliciano then translated that explanation for Paulina, who's the newest to English. And then Paulina, to be sure that she had understood, summarized in English while pointing to the video to support her summary. So ultimately, all 3 of these students had a meaningful interaction about climate change by drawing on 2 languages, articulate gestures, and the video itself. And this was possible because the students were encouraged to use their own communicative resources, and the classroom provided tangible resources to scaffold the students developing English.
Thank you, Nora. We have time for a question or possibly 2. And I want to reiterate also that we welcome questions from graduate students as well as faculty. Maureen and then Julianne. Then we'll...
Sorry. Nora, I just wonder if you could say a little bit about how the classroom or how the teacher sets up the classroom such that that sort of interaction is known to be welcome.
Yeah, sure. So in this case, in some cases, it's very explicit that that there are activities that are designed that really ask students to do a lot of translation for themselves before they are. Sometimes it's translating the instructions for an activity. In some cases, it's annotating texts using their home languages. And in other cases, it's that they're really designed for them to be working in diverse language groups, so that students, all the really diverse skills and experiences that students are bringing are sort of required to be working in concert with one another. So I would say spans in this particular example that I had provided, it was not, it wasn't sort of the most collaborative activity at face value. They're each working individually, but because the environment, because other activities in that classroom were so often collaborative, and because the students really knew that they were always encouraged to use their home language, and also all of the other kinds of communicative resources like gestures to get their ideas across, that was something that they really intuitively leaned on, and never felt like that was never going to be discouraged, but really promote understanding both for themselves and for their peers.
Thank you.
Thank you. Quick question from Julianne.
Oh, well, it might not be quick. I wanted to say about, I know that you use ethnographic methods to study these communities, and I was wondering if you could talk more about how doing an ethnography helps you to discover these ways that these students are taking up space in a way that, interviewing them might not illuminate.
All right. It's all about the practices and the activities that they're doing. And so, and then the other side is about making sure that you're not co-opting just one definition of what Blackness is, because Blackness is many different things. And so when you have a kid, for example, who is understanding the importance of what is the difference between Black matters and all life matters, right? And it's using things like an horchata or a taco to explain these to his Latinx friends. Then you start seeing that Blackness in this space is not just soul food, it's also tacos and horchatas, right? And it's not necessarily popular narrative of what we understand Blackness to be in the United States. And so that's what ethnography does for me. It's an opportunity to hang out with these students and really be in them, to start understanding also the languages and the ways in which they're moving through space. And so my argument is always that space is not necessarily the backdrop, but it's really, when you forefront it, then you start seeing how these diasporas are really kind of coming together and how they're moving similar and differently as well. I don't know if that answers some sort of something.
That was really helpful. Thank you. Thank you, Dre. Okay, we're going to move on to our next speaker now. We'll have some more time at the end to discuss as well. I'd like to introduce Salvador Huitzilopochtli. And Sal is a doctoral candidate in mathematics education, studying mathematical writing and justification.
Thank you, Cynthia. In my study of mathematical writing and justification, I expect to find that with the opportunity to use language in oral and written modes, students from non-dominant communities are poised to reason, justify, and refine their arguments when learning mathematics. Students of math are often asked to show their work, but why do teachers and other adults require this? Learning to reason and justify is important because they represent key mathematics standards and practices. Unfortunately, many students from non-dominant communities do not have opportunities to participate in these practices. My study considers how opportunities to write mathematically could support students to construct and refine mathematical justifications. Writing tasks include different forms that prompt students to convince themselves, a friend, and a skeptic, mathematical writing conferences, and opportunities for revision. In the example presented on the slide, an 8th grade student provided a powerful justification and commented on the improvements. She contended that sums of 3 numbers will be even when 2 of the numbers are odd, and odd when 2 of the numbers are even. Referring to her example-based reasoning, she said, "As I keep trying to make the numbers bigger, it doesn't change the rule." After some writing and discussion, she revised her justification for more general reasoning and commented, "When I use these 2 examples instead of just showing a few equations with actual numbers, it proves that this conjecture is true for all equations." As illustrated by the students' comments and work, mathematical reasoning and education can improve through writing tasks that leverage audience and revision.
Thank you, Sal. Our next speaker is Julianne Foxworthy Gonzalez, a doctoral candidate in mathematics education studying classroom discussions and statistical literacy.
Hi. Multilingual students are often not given opportunities to draw conclusions from data in math classes, but statistical inference is important for students in learning math. Inference is at the heart of statistics. Statistical inquiry is motivated by a question about a population. Pictured here is that biggest circle. Data is gathered from a sample and explored. Then statisticians use sophisticated math on the way to the final, most important step, making an inference, a claim about the population as a whole, the answer to the question. Most multilingual students never experience the inference step in school. Typical middle school lessons focus on data isolated from the other stages of inquiry and prioritize using formal vocabulary and precise calculations, often without meaning or purpose. This results in isolated bits of knowledge that are difficult to remember and apply to new situations. My study focuses on giving multilingual students opportunities to participate in the meaningful practice of statistical inference. Typical lessons can be adapted to incorporate inference. For example, a task that asks students to calculate the mean height of the students in their own classroom can be extended to asking students to infer the mean height of students in another class, thereby fostering debate about the validity of competing inferences. Learning with purpose is a strength for many multilingual students, and incorporating inference gives purpose and meaning to early statistics education, giving students access to complex mathematical thinking.
Thank you. We have time for a question for the last two speakers, and then we'll also have some time for full discussion of the four. Right now, it would be for Julianne and Sal.
A
Go ahead.
question for Sal. I'm wondering, when the students are using writing in a way to express their thoughts, do you observe any interesting interaction between written and verbal linguistic strengths? How these two modalities might interact or affect each other?
So the way that the oral interactions might interact with some of the writing, the way I've seen it written about in other research on like conferencing students, is that students sometimes will take those oral texts and use them in their subsequent drafts. So as you're talking to them, and you might, like, you know, they said for clarity, or they might be talking with a peer, they will then turn around and in their revision incorporate some of those new either vocabulary words, or they might incorporate the way a particular phrasing was put together. They'll use those in their subsequent revision. So they do kind of build on each other. And in that regard, that's why we use both oral language as well as written language in tandem to support the meaning-making process.
Great, thank you.
Hi, for Julianne, this is Greg Gilbert. In teaching core courses where people are expected to have some kind of a background in statistics and sampling and things like that, that inference part seems to be universally missing in their training. So is there, your title and you're talking about multilingual students, is there something special that you see that's different in the impact of that, having that missing for multilingual students as opposed to all students? Is there something special there?
Well, statistical inference is missing for all students. You're absolutely right. Even if a kid gets access to it, it doesn't happen probably until they're in AP statistics or in college level statistics courses. And so that's an important piece right there for why multilingual students getting access to this is really important, because they have differential access to AP courses and college level statistics courses. We know that mathematics courses act as a gateway. So if we don't give multilingual students access to inference at the earliest grades, they may never be exposed to inference in their whole lives. Of course, other students may never be exposed to this. Furthermore, and importantly, mathematics instruction for multilingual students overwhelmingly focuses on procedures and using formal vocabulary rather than making sense of the mathematical ideas. And so this again is a place where these students are differentially impacted by instructional practices. So it's especially important to make sure that they get access to inference.
Cool, thank you.
Thank you.